Okay, so welcome to the final part of the book, Xerxes' Lament. So, up until this point, we've had the Atossa consulting the ghost of Darius, and I think that's quite important in a sort of structural sense that that's just before the entrance of Xerxes, because we get, amongst other things, we get a build up to what's happened. We're reminded of the defeat. Atossa fills in a few details, but we get to see what a good king is like. Now, even just the very office of kingliness, is that the word? Anyway, the office of king is flawed, but it can be done better than Xerxes does it. And so when we see Darius and the respect in which he's held, and the understanding of the gods, and the sort of more positive, mature interactions that he has with Atossa, we get a kind of point of comparison for Xerxes, who then appears once Atossa and Darius have left. So, Xerxes' entrance, this could have been one of the sort of high points of the play, if you like, because in some ways it's all been building up to this point. We've had these constant descriptions of Xerxes' actions. So the chorus start off by talking about Xerxes and the fact that he launched this great invasion. Then we see the Xerxes appearing in Atossa's dream, and again we get hints as to what that might mean. Then we get the description of the Battle of Salamis, the consequences of Xerxes' actions, and we get a little bit of a description of what Xerxes himself does. He leaps up from his throne, he's deceived into attacking, all of these sorts of things. So we get the actions of Xerxes. Then when we get the description of Darius and Atossa, it's really again talking all about Xerxes. So in a weird way, even though Xerxes isn't present, the play arguably the play is about him all the way through. Now, obviously, there are other arguments. In some ways, he's a largely irrelevant figure, but that depends on your reading of the Persians. So, what I would like you to do is to draw a picture of, and again, it could be a word picture, it doesn't have to be a sketch, although I think a sketch, including the staging, the stages and all that sort of stuff, could be extremely useful for really getting across the impact, the message. So what I would like you to do is to read through read through the sort of entrance of Xerxes' little speech to the chorus, some of the interactions Xerxes has with the chorus, and try and put together a picture of what Xerxes could have looked like as he entered the stage. But also, once you've done that, once you've drawn it and labelled it, do the analysis. What does this mean? So, for example, will Xerxes enter Xerxes does enter with torn clothes. Why is this so significant in terms of impact and characterization? Well, there's a couple of ways of looking at it. Obviously, the Persians are so desperately proud of their soft, luxurious robes, and the fact that they've been torn is quite symbolic of Athenian victory over Persians and their soft, effeminate ways. You could also look at it like this: that Xerxes has been running for 3 months away from Salamis, because remember, at Salamis, that's where he tore his clothes. So, I think 3 months is the time the Spartans calculated it would take to march to Susa. So Xerxes has been fleeing for months, and he hasn't even stopped to change his clothes. That's how cowardly he is. That's how ridiculous, that's how excessive he is. So it's not just labeling these things, it's labeling and then analyzing, but also considering some of the words that he exchanges with the chorus. Cool, so pause for 10 minutes and have a go at that. Well done. So hopefully you've got these and taken these and developed them and added in some of your own ideas. So the impact of Xerxes. So he starts off or enters weeping. Those are some of the first words he says. Sorry, the puppy's chewing things. So yes, weeping. The first thing that Xerxes does, or the first words he says, is weep. So again, not necessarily unreasonably. There have been many millions of Persians lost, but this is a very emotional entrance for this very emotional individuals. And remember, emotional excess is again a classic characteristic of the barbarian. This is also something that's kind of often repeated by the messenger and the chorus. There's this constant excess, one might argue, of emotion. On the other hand, we need to be a little bit balanced about this. You know, Salamis was a huge tragedy. Sorry, the puppy's attacking the cat who's sitting there. So yeah, it's not completely unreasonable in some ways, although I do genuinely think the emotion is portrayed as excessive. So Xerxes could also be wearing a tiara, again, just that real sign of a Persian monarch, you know, this excess and luxury. On the other hand, he may have abandoned it. So, you know, again, hinting just at the kind of terror that he feels. The chorus do later on say, "Is this all you've got?" When he's holding up his quiver. So, again, you could have included that. You could have made a point of its absence. Now, we could have had, for a sort of stage direction that, again, we don't know, but you know, we could have had Xerxes running in, you know, looking over his shoulder, still fearful of the Athenians 3 months later. So there could have been this really terrified figure bursting onto the stage. And Xerxes himself does point out that he is trembling, and he's trembling at these grave men. So it seems he's even afraid of the chorus at this point, because that seems to be, or arguably that's who he's referring to. You know, he's come in, he's seen the chorus, and trembling with fear, his limbs stop working. So he is a genuinely terrified individual, even after the Battle of Salamis, being 3 months ago or so. The other thing that he would have in a very sort of physically symbolic way is his quiver. So that's the part of the bow and arrow in which you store the arrows. So it's not part of the bow and arrow. So you've got the bow, you've got the arrow, and you've got the quiver. So really, that's quite an interesting idea in that Xerxes has the only thing he's managed to retain is the sort of useless, least warlike element. He's lost his symbol of kingship. So the other aspect that we can perhaps think about with regard to the quiver is that it's the only thing that's attached to his body. So he's thrown everything else away, but he couldn't get rid of the quiver because it's strapped onto your back or side via a belt. So he really has just retained one sort of very impotent symbol of Persianness and kingship. Now, obviously, if we put this all together in a stage performance, we've got Xerxes up on the stage, we've got the chorus below, we've got him sort of running in. Again, probably reminded of the comparison with Darius, because according to the book, there is the tomb of Darius as a kind of prop or permanent fixture of the stage there. So a powerful entrance that really would have reminded you of the weakness of Xerxes, the patheticness, the effeminacy of this character. Might we feel some sympathy for Xerxes? It's possible, but I think that's unlikely. I think throughout the play, it seems more likely we can feel sympathy for Atossa, or maybe some of these individual Persians who don't seem to have done too much wrong. But Xerxes himself, I don't think there's supposed to be any sympathy for him at this particular point. So, moving on. Xerxes then speaks to the chorus, and the chorus starts to make some very interesting points. And again, we need to think about this in comparison to Darius. So when Darius appears, the chorus can't even speak to him. They're so terrified of his majesty, his kingly powers. Yet when Xerxes appears, the chorus are a little bit more resistant. There seems to be almost this idea that Darius has almost broken the kind of respect that people have for these Persian kings, because they're quite accusatory. They say, many died slaughtered for Xerxes. That's a kind of direct criticism of a Persian king that we wouldn't necessarily expect. And they do go on to do that even more throughout this scene. Xerxes, however, still can't get beyond everything being about him. Behold me, a loathed and piteous outcast. So there's still no real acknowledgement from Xerxes that he has made any mistake or he has done anything wrong, he's still blaming everyone else, blaming the gods, blaming the Greeks, but not really his own arrogance and his own poor decisions that led to the defeat. Now, the Persian chorus respond to this with some inauspicious music, an oriental mourning, notes plaintive and discordant. So here we get a very strong indication that at this point the music section of the tragedy would have been playing some very strange, exotic Eastern music, or what the Greeks viewed as Eastern music. And we see this happening in Hollywood, or used to, all the time. There are certain sort of jingles and tunes and bars and chords that can take you to give something an Asian flavor or an African flavor. Or sorry, Loki decided that it was necessary that we move forward from that slide. He was clearly bored of it. So we've got this sense of a very exotic Eastern mourning procession, and that's a really important idea with this scene, because what we're seeing is a funeral procession, and the Greeks would have instantly understood what was going on here. The parade that the chorus sort of form a parade, and Xerxes leads the parade, and this is a funereal parade of mourning that the Greeks would have understood, with some very Persian differences. Now, Greek funeral customs are quite interesting. So when someone dies, you wash and dress the body and put a coin in their mouth for the ferryman. Then the family sing a variety of funeral songs, sometimes with professional singers. And then you have a very public funeral procession where you take the body to the grave. And this is one of those few times when women are actually allowed out of the house, but they would have been veiled, of course, if they were noble women. And when the funeral procession is marching through the town, there is a bit of wailing and mourning, but especially amongst the women. The women play a very kind of dramatic and significant role. So they are all veiled and wearing their sort of finest clothes. And when a member of the public approaches the procession, they will start wailing at the top of their lungs, tearing their clothes, maybe ripping their veils, really emphasizing the kind of emotion. And it's a slightly kind of formulaic process, and you even get professional mourners, professional people, never met anyone before, but they show up at the funeral and really kind of go to town with the kind of emotional outpouring. And this is, in a Greek funeral, this is very much a female role. That's not to say men wouldn't have shown emotion or been very sad themselves, but this kind of wailing and tearing and excess grief is a kind of characteristic of the feminine at funerals. So here we go. We can see from a pot they're in this procession, and there is the women, as you can tell by their white arms, they're there sort of shrieking and wailing and appealing to the gods. Now, the important thing with the funeral procession is that the Persians, who are described as veiled, are playing a very, very feminine role. So when they're constantly talking about weeping and lamenting, when they're tearing their clothes, when they're tearing the veils that they seem to be wearing, they're fulfilling perfectly the kind of female funereal role, and that again ties into this kind of idea of Persian effeminacy. Now, once they've sort of got this out of the way, they start questioning Xerxes once more. What went wrong? And Xerxes blames Ares. Xerxes says Ares helped her more, so talking about the city of Athens. So again, we get this further suggestion that the gods are behind the defeat of the Persians. And this is something that, from Xerxes' perspective, this is him perhaps refusing to accept responsibility. But from an Athenian perspective, this is true, because the gods protect the city of Athens. They're fighting for a sort of divine cause, divine justice, if you like. So is it actually so surprising that the gods are on the Greek side? Now, the chorus then go on to really accuse Xerxes. They go through a classic kind of list of names, individual names, and again, we need to think about what they do. Xerxes and Anarches, so they're pronounced in a very strange and foreign way. They come from different parts of the world, which creates that huge sense of size and scale and exoticness, and people from Egypt, people from Bactria, people from Libya, people from wherever. They all make up this huge army that can't defeat the city of Athens. We then go back to the nature of the individual and names. Are we doing this so that people can feel true pride and celebrate, or are we doing it to ensure that there's some sympathy for the Persians, so that they have some kind of humanity to them to give their suffering meaning? Does it help with celebration? Does it help with catharsis? We've talked this through in the last kind of list of names. So anyway, the chorus make this accusation: you left them there, rock ravaged and wave tossed. So Xerxes is facing a kind of public haranguing or grilling by the chorus in a way that would never have happened to Darius, and possibly wouldn't have happened to Xerxes before this event. So we're seeing a real kind of collapse of Xerxes' kingly authority. Think about how the chorus behaved with Darius. They couldn't even speak to him. Now Xerxes has come back and they're going, you left them there, you left them. You screwed up, you abandoned them. It's quite it's unbelievably accusatory for Persian citizens speaking to a Persian king. Now, the other quote is obviously this quiver for my arrows, which again, we've talked about that in the kind of depiction of Xerxes initially. Now, then the chorus and Xerxes would have formed up into the sort of departure procession, something that happens in a lot of tragedy, but here is sort of wound into the kind of funeral procession, departing the stage. And the Persians start making these very strange, peculiar Persian noises that have no meaning in Greek. And I think we're really having reinforced this idea of exoticness, of foreignness of others. You've got men with veils, ripping clothes, excessive emotion, and then this ototototoi sound, bizarre, unusual, meaningless noise. So you can imagine for the Greeks this would have been a really kind of peculiar situation where people are transgressing the normal gender roles in a ceremony that they almost feel that they understand. Xerxes then leads them on a sort of an instructional process of mourning. Weep and howl, tear your gowns, tear them through. So he's instructing his people to perform the rites of mourning. Are we seeing him sort of seizing control of people's actions and motions, or are we seeing just a sort of bit of an emphasis on the ritualistic mourning to again really emphasize the success of Athens? Look at it either way. So that is the play. That's our kind of quite high speed run through, picking out some key scenes and key ideas. What we're going to do for the next part of the lesson is some of those scholarly thought exercises. So the idea is you take Rosenblum's idea and write for 5 minutes without stopping your opinion, and you need to analyze her opinion and use facts from the play, evidence in the play, to support it. So you might start something like this. Rosenblum argues that the Persians is more a tragedy of defeat than a celebration of victory. I agree to some extent, as there is a significant emphasis on the suffering of Persians. For example, the individualization of Persians during the messenger speech in Salamis, i.e. Artaphernes. On the other hand, or perhaps more convincingly though, there is far too much celebration of Athenian morals and values throughout the play. For example, blah, 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 blah. So you're analysing Rosenblum's opinion and saying whether you agree with it or not and why. So I think looking at this one, a more sophisticated scholar would identify that Rosenblum isn't saying that it is a tragedy and not a celebration of victory. She's saying that on balance it is more of a tragedy of defeat than a celebration of victory. But there's no reason why it can't be necessarily a bit of both. So stop the video, do a 5-minute analysis of that quote, and really focus on using clear and specific evidence from the text. Quotes, short quotes, if you can. Very good. So next quote from Harrison. Aeschylus revels in the destruction of the Persians. To what extent do you agree? So again, 5 minutes, 2 or 3 facts or details from the play that support it, or a couple that support, a couple that challenge, but as long as you're being analytical and coming to a view, that is the most important thing. Good, well done. And finally, a great quote from Cartledge: "Persian men are womanish." So I suppose you could disagree with this, but you really want to be finding 2 or 3 areas from the play that show the different ways in which Persian men are womanish. So try and think of 3 different ways in which Persian men have been depicted as womanish to show that it is a very good overall picture. Lovely. Good. Okay. Well, by the time you have done all of that, and if you've done it properly, that should take you the best part of the lesson. So I will see you in the next lesson. Take care.